Welcome everyone to episode number 2 of the Farms of BC podcast. Today we're going to be discussing everything to do with farmhouses. Now, this is one of the most requested topics we get here at Farms of BC, and we're going to make sure we dive deep on this one for you guys. Stay tuned. All right guys, episode number 2, farmhouses. I know this is an exciting topic. It's one of the most requested topics, probably the most requested question that we always get. How big can you build? All these kind of things. It's exciting because Nav, Dodge, you guys are actually in the process of building right now.
And you're in the permit process, right?
Yeah, just starting it off, so I'm going to be learning a lot today, right? So along with the audience today. Dodge, big difference, you're in the floodplain.
Yep.
Nav, you're outside the floodplain.
Yeah, and you're in the floodplain.
I'm in the floodplain, so a little bit of a difference there because I'm starting it after the 2019 changes.
Oh.
And Dodge, you started before that, right?
Before.
Yeah, so you were in the previous rules.
Yeah.
There's a big distinction there because there are people who are like, oh, you know what? New house is being built right now. It's the new rules, it should be, or whatever the case is, but size is bigger than what's allowed.
Yes.
Why is that, right? So all these kind of questions we're going to go into a little bit.
Yep.
But first and foremost, buying and selling an existing farmhouse.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you guys can speak to a little bit, maybe on the buying side first. Nav, what do you think?
Yeah, just some things, when you're buying a farm with a home on it, ideally the things you'd want to check for is the first things first, home inspection, basic. You do that on any residential purchase. Then you want to make sure you know what utilities you have. So on farmland, not everybody has city water, not everybody has natural gas, and not everybody's on sewer. Mm-hmm. So 99% of the farm properties will never have sewer connection. They're always on septic. Depending on the municipality you're in, most farms do have city water, and then the other ones have wells. So they have drilled wells. So you just have to make sure you know what the farm has and then what to test. So if it's a well, you got to get a quality test and a pressure test. And and instead of a sewer connection, you'd have a septic, and you'd want to get that tested too when you're purchasing a home.
Yeah, septic inspection, obviously that's huge.
Something that else just came to mind, you also want to check. So if your home is smaller, which is under the allowable 5,400 square feet, you'd want to talk to the city if you can extend instead of extend the existing home. Okay. So when you're buying, you want to know your options.
Right.
From my understanding, you can. I think it's going to be based on your engineering reports to see if everything meets the criteria.
Yeah, engineering, design, and then your architect, yeah.
I would get that double checked. From my understanding, I thought you couldn't extend past 5,400.
No, up to 54.
Up to 54.
Up to 54.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, most older farmhouses, they average between 2,500 to 3,500. And it's not something you really want to tear down if it's in good condition. Mm-hmm. So you may want to add an extension of 1,000, 2,000 square feet, but then do a full reno on the existing home. So it's always good to kind of get that due diligence done prior to you removing subjects.
For sure. I mean, renovations go a long way these days.
Yes.
At the end of the day, you can make a big difference with just a renovation on a 3,000 square foot home and fulfill like 90% of people's needs.
Oh, for sure.
Right?
That's a lot cheaper too.
For sure. And then I guess on the buying side, so that basically covers septic inspections. We got well inspections, covers the water and the home inspections. Yeah. So those are the 3 primary.
Yeah.
And as a buyer, if you're not happy with the existing home, you want to talk to the municipality of where you're purchasing, what their rules and regulations are to build a brand new house. So that's kind of the part of the due diligence you do want to do also before removing subjects.
You might want to have a chat with the ALC too, with your local region, to see if the municipal rules align with the ALC rules, just to ensure everything matches up when you're going to build.
Yeah, what we have seen is even though there's a provincial body of the Agricultural Land Commission, they have this generic rule that they'd want the municipalities to follow, but each municipality has tweaked it to cater to their cities. Not significantly, but just minor. So definitely know the rules of the Agricultural Land Reserve, plus see what your city or municipality will allow you to do.
Yeah, you need the blessings on both sides. And then I guess from the selling perspective, Any recommendations when you're selling your new or old farmhouse?
I think it depends on the house. It really depends on the house. I think a lot of the buyers will walk in and they'll see if a house has potential value or not. Some houses you could put some lipstick on and you could make them decent, where maybe a lot of buyers aren't looking to live in that house, but they might buy it for a rental property. So I think you have to take it case to case. But if it's a house where you could do some work, painting it, cleaning it, doing a good pressure wash on the outside, little things go a long way.
So these are low expense,
Minor.
but big changes, like big impact.
I would stick to your minor changes. I wouldn't do big renovations like big kitchens, big washrooms. I feel that every buyer buying a quote unquote acreage or estate, they're going to want to put their own touch to it, right? So they're going to do that. So I don't think putting the money into those things are going to give you added value. I would focus more on landscaping, which is the curb appeal, focus more on decluttering on the inside. Even around the property, really making it more presentable, focusing your energies on that then versus injecting 20 grand into a kitchen.
Right. First impressions, basically.
First impressions, yeah.
It also it depends on the size of property too. I feel like when you're going to smaller acreages, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 acre parcels, where a lot of people are buying it as hobby farms, houses that they actually want to live in.
Yeah.
Those are the houses you do put more money into to fixing them up. The guys that are buying the 30, 40, 50 acre farms, they're looking at it for farming purposes more so the actual house itself, unless it's an existing home where their family's moving in.
We've had it so many times where the land is actually so much more important than the home itself. It's almost like they don't even care about the home itself. Whereas, if you got 50 acres and you got like a 1,500, 2,500 square foot home, we've had many instances where the people don't even want to, they don't care much for the home itself. Like they don't even go inside at this point.
And we go do multiple evaluations on farm properties, and I'll have the owner themselves come and say to me, hey, I know the house is not worth much, but you have to understand, coming from a buyer's perspective, the house still has value, because even if you did some minor renos, you can still rent it out. So you can generate anywhere from $1,500 to $2,500 to possibly even $3,000 of rental income, which offsets anywhere from $400,000 to $700,000 mortgage. So that's one perspective. Two, they have the option to move in and then build their existing home, their new home, while they live there, and then tear that down after. And then the last option is, even though, as long as it's a livable, habitable home, it's much easier to get bank financing.
That's right.
So for a buyer's perspective, that's why we're right now in a market like this, you're looking at versus anywhere from 25 to 30% down versus bare land pushing up to 50% down, right? So it depends on.
That's a big difference.
Yeah, it is a big difference, yes.
And I mean, banks do their own appraisals. Is the house inhabitable and all this and that, right? So those are big, things to think about. And even so, in the house itself, another person that's going to be buying it, they're going to be thinking about how much do they have to put in before they can even rent this out, right?
Yeah.
So if it's in livable condition, like that would be a good tip for the sellers to actually put it up into a livable condition that's actually nice, paint it, do whatever you got to do, so that you can actually rent it out, or then a future person can rent it out, right? So huge. And there's rugs versus flooring, all this and that. That kind of question comes up. I know obviously flooring is easier for renters, especially because you have less to maintain. But even so, maybe just leave it as is and let the next person decide how they want.
Flooring, I would. I think if you have carpet, you might want to get the carpet shampooed. Little things like that, but I wouldn't go and change it.
Right. Because there's going to be a preference from the next person, right? And they may or may not care.
Yeah.
Excellent. Houses, how many can you build on your farm? That's a big question.
That's a constant question.
It's changing.
Yeah, and it's changed so much here in the last 10 years. The Agricultural Land Commission came down in 2019. They said they were very strong-headed and said, one house per farm, 5,400 square feet. We don't care how big your operation is, if you're multi-generational. They wanted to take away mobile homes. They wanted to and then that was January of 2019. And as they started doing the study of that does not make sense, then now they've came into effect of now you're allowed a second residence of 980 square feet, which will allow you can rent that out. You can use it for farm worker housing, or you can use it for multi-generational second residence. I still don't think that's big enough for second generation, because most families are quite big on farm acreages, and they do live together.
Yeah, I don't think that would accommodate an actual owner's family, but it may be good rental income. It may be a good, help with the mortgage.
I know they wanted to restrict the mega mansions, and I agree with that.
Yeah.
Some of the stuff that we saw was quite extravagant. It was excessive. It had nothing to do with agriculture. But I think coming down with the rules that they did also doesn't make sense. I think they do need to revisit that and find a happy medium where it makes sense.
Yeah, I feel like they're on the right track, but definitely there's changes that could be made to make it a little bit easier. There's a lot of
stuff that can be changed.
There's a lot of
And I think and the third home you're allowed to build can be for farm worker housing.
Yes. So worker housing, and we deal with this quite a bit just because we do have a lot of workers that we bring in, foreign workers, and there's a lot of red tape that you have to go through to make sure these residences are following all the rules, right? So, and that's a big thing, because you can get a failure right off the bat if it doesn't pass all these things, right? In our situation, we have quite a few. We have upwards of 20 foreign workers right now. And we've just, top to bottom renovated that completely to the point where it's actually like a nice home where you would actually want to live in.
When's the last time you guys built or renovated?
Yeah, that's right after the floods. So right after the floods, because it was below the flood grade, because it's underground basements, we had to fully gut it, fully renovate it, and like we did top tier work there because just in case any issues in the future come up, we won't have as much of a problem again, right?
Yeah. So the answer to your question, it is about 2 to 3, as long as you can prove to the municipality plus agricultural land commission that it justifies for agricultural use, right?
Well, the second one, the 980 square feet, you can actually build a detached, and you can actually build that in your building.
Yeah, so you're right. You're right. You don't have to make it a second residence. You have the option to make it a standalone second. You can bring in a mobile home, or you're right. You can also build it within your barn, and just save some cost that way.
Yeah, it has to be an agricultural structure, and then it can be on the top of it, for example. It could be inside it, of course, but basically it has to be 980 square feet.
Yeah.
And just found out recently, just because I'm going through all this stuff.
Well, it's actually very new. I think they only came up with this rule a few months ago.
They rolled it out, I think mid last year, not too long ago. It was quite new.
In September. Ag Refresh is what it's called in Abbotsford specifically. I'm not sure if it's everywhere, but yeah, that was the name of it. And then they did approve that just recently.
Can you attach that square footage to your main home?
No, you'd have to have it separate, which we'll get into the topic of stuff that makes sense and doesn't make sense. And we're boots on the ground, so we hear it from actual farmers. We're farmers ourselves, so we understand the problems. One thing is they did allow allowing us to have these smaller homes addition to your main house is a big help. We know in Lower Mainland, Greater Vancouver, what's our housing issue is a big problem. Prior to 2019, you were only allowed a mobile or a second residence, and it had to have been for farm workers. We've got one of our biggest issue is rentals. But if you look at how many properties or titles we have from Delta all the way to Chilliwack, we're looking at tens of thousands. If every individual was allowed a second, even a mobile, you know how much that can help and it won't impact the farming, or it won't hurt the agricultural lands, but will solve a housing problem as well, right?
That was a very good move on their part. I think that was a unique solution. They actually did do that, right?
Prior it used to be, nope, you have a second resident, has to prove that it's for farm workers. Now they said, well, farm workers or second generational family, you were allowed to have it for family previously as well. But now them openly saying you're allowed to rent it, which is good on them. It's good, yeah.
And I think that was something that very gray area, people were doing it regardless. We were seeing this day in, day out. But that's just something that, you know, people are trying to make do with what they have. And I understand it, but this really alleviated that issue, right? So I feel like that was a good move on their part. Now, question of size, that's maybe not ideal. I think probably a little bit higher would have been better.
Yeah. Speaking of size, the size that they've allowed, that 5,400, the one thing that just completely doesn't make any sense is you're allowed to do a 5,400 square foot rancher.
Yeah, yeah. That's right. That's the size limit. Right now it's 500 meters squared, which is the equivalent of 5381 square feet.
Yeah.
Right? So that's with a garage included in that.
So one thing that I think a lot of the farmers were very disappointed, you're wasting the same amount of agricultural land with a 5,400 square foot footprint rancher.
Yeah.
It would have had made no difference to the land commission, to the municipalities, to give the farmers the option to build the second story.
Yeah.
And if it allowed a 3-story, which we'll get into floodplain versus out of floodplain, it still is the same footprint.
That's right.
You know, when it comes to politics and business, it's more about pleasing the crowd versus doing what's logical. And I think what happened there was too much noise politically with these big homes. And I think they never really cared about the farmer. They cared about the noise, which in politics, they tend to do that more often than not. But I would love to see that one rule change.
Yeah.
And if that one rule would change, it will not affect the rules and regulations set by the Agricultural Land Reserve today.
And the same amount of land is wasted.
It's the same amount of land wastage.
Yeah.
It's the same amount of space. Having, you know, the individual who owns 100 acres or has been farming for 50, 60 years, they never even thought to build a house. Their main goal and purpose was revenue generated by more farmland, increase the farming operation and business. I know our dad was farming since 1970s.
Yeah.
His thought was never, hey, I'm going to build a big house. His thought was always, hey, we need to grow our farming operation, grow our farming operation. When we were ready to build our house, these new rules came in effect. We were rushed with our architectural plans. We were rushed to do everything just so we can meet. Just to meet the guidelines. And you know, for some, and we're just one case. I've spoken to many farmers that have been farming for many years. Their goal was never to build a house. Their goal was to expand the operation, keep the family close, have the family work on the farm and grow the business. That was primary. But I think changing this one single aspect or rule will give those families the option to build bigger without jeopardizing the wishes of the land commission or the municipalities, and finding that fair medium. Yeah. So if you wanted to build a 10,000 square feet, you can. Yeah. Because you still have that 5,400 square foot footprint. It would just go on top. And if you're allowed a 3-story, allow them to build 12, 13,000 because the other 2,000, 3,000 would be underground. It's still going to affect the same footprint.
Most people wouldn't build 10,000. Like you have the.
Most people wouldn't. It's expensive.
Well, you have the footprint of 5,400, but in order to go over 10,000, you're making a box.
Yeah, that's right. And most people would actually do pillars or something different, right? And it would be a 2-story in one area.
Maybe 8,000 to 9,000 square feet.
Yeah, that would be typically what would happen. It would be probably 7,000 to like 8,000, something like that.
Yeah. Like a decent house. But you're not tight. You have options.
I like what Delta did too. If you look at the rules before the 5,400 square foot rule came out now, Delta actually had that in place years before the ALC brought that up.
Yeah, so Delta has always been very progressive. They had, you were over 20 acres.
17, I think.
16, close to 20. But it was, you were allowed 2 homes. You were allowed
54 and 3,500.
54, 3,500.
And
you know,
that's
that's a fair rule. Like you've got your main house, and then if you've got family like your son or your daughter or somebody that's multi-generational, that's part of the farming operation, they have the option to build a second home. And you look at some of the Delta farmers, that's why they're multi-generational, is because they had the option to live there. Moving forward with these rules and regulations, it's going to be harder to get the second generation or third generation motivated to stay on that farm. It's just, you're almost pushing them away.
Well, we see it all the time now. We're
Yeah.
seeing a lot of people actually selling because the kids don't want to stay there and farm.
That's a very common story.
Yeah.
Very common. And I mean, there's a couple things I wanted to add there. There is a rule within the current refresh that allows you to build unlimited size as long as you're over 98 acres on one parcel.
But there's not that many parcels that are 98 acres or bigger.
Extremely rare.
I would say that's less than 1%.
Yeah.
What they should do is either do the 5,400, allow the second story, because you're still wasting the same amount of farmland, or scale it by acreage. And you know, if you have a 15-acre farm, you can build an X size home, 20, 30, 40, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because no one's really buying a 40, 50-acre farm, 30-acre farm just to build a big house. They're actually buying it to actually farm the land.
The one good thing is, I know ALC came in and they hit these rules really hard. I have seen certain cases where they are starting to understand and modify and change. I have a few of my clients that own 40 plus acres, full big operation. They had an existing home that was bigger than 980 square feet, and it was close to 4,000 square feet. They wanted to apply for a second residence because it was multi-generational, and they did get approved. So yeah, with the variance. So you do see that the Agricultural Land Commission is starting to identify that, you know, we do need to make some exceptions, and I'm starting to see that they have been, which is good. You know, going to apply to the Land Commission, that's a challenge on its own. Sometimes the municipality just won't support it. And now with the new rules, you need municipality support before you can even apply. Previously, it was apply, get ALC decision, and then it'll go to the municipality. So regardless, you know, I think it is, time will fix the problem. And I think the more they run into more scenarios and situations, they'll revisit the rules and regulations, and they'll modify to eventually accommodate.
A couple things on that as well. I mean, nowadays you got to speak the language of the city. Because if you're not saying it the right way, they're not hearing you. So I was actually working with a consultant, and I found that to be extremely helpful for what we needed to get done. We tried and failed multiple times prior to. And once we got that, you know, consultant on board, it became a lot easier to have that conversation.
Yeah.
If, you know, the audience is ever looking for something like that, just reach out. That's a great way to
And don't be afraid to reach out to your local council. I've noticed a lot of people are just afraid to reach out and ask for help.
It's the only way change is going to happen.
And not only that, I think the councillors want to see them get people to reach out. I think more people are just afraid to ask.
Well, I remember when we ran into this, I reached out to a counselor, and that counselor actually, it went a long way, because they actually said, you know what, gather all the farmers that are facing this issue, because our preload was done, our house permit was actually, our building plan was almost done. But the thing was, the preload was there, it was ready to go.
It was ready for 3 years.
We along with, like, I think it was 32 farmers in Surrey that were ready to build. And they made this rule, and they said, you have X amount of time to get your plan passed.
And I think there was like 4 months, 3 months. People are trying to build their home that they're going to live in for the rest of their life. And they've worked 40, 50, 60 years in agriculture. Now they finally want to do this, and you want them to put this together in 2-3 months. The deadlines were ridiculous. The timelines were unachievable.
I think it was 3 months.
Was there extensions, anything like that?
No, there was no exception.
No, so you had to get your plan approved by
A certain period of time, and you had to pour your foundation within some unrealistic time as well. It got to the point where, you know, again, it was more political versus what's realistic and what makes sense.
It was more challenging for the guys on in the floodplain, because you had to preload.
Yeah.
A lot of people's preloads weren't settled, and they forcefully poured their foundation in, and then they had to rectify the situation afterwards in order to build their home.
So how did you guys cope with that? Because you probably didn't have the plans ready. You probably just
We had to rush ahead. And I was working on a plan. We rushed it through, got it in, it got passed. We rushed in our foundation. Our preload actually wasn't ready to go. Poured the foundation, had the foundation sit for an additional year, which wasn't the ideal situation, and then we started building.
Did you have any leeway to do alterations or anything like that?
Yeah, they were flexible on that.
They were, but the foundation was already in. So you're restricted on
You had to work within the foundation, yeah. But you know what? It's change. Not every rule is gonna go your way or the way it should go. It's a process, but I'm happy that the ALC and the municipality they know that this was very strong, and they're slowly changing it, which is gonna progress over time and it'll get fixed. Yeah.
Just bouncing back to the secondary residence side of things, because we've actually done that as well.
Yeah.
It's a larger secondary residence, and the reason we got that approved is justification. So if you have the justification to show that you are a large farmer for whatever your operation is,
and
you're able to. They're relatively reasonable, but because they're not out to get you, it's more so they're trying to protect farmland,
Correct.
which makes sense.
Correct.
And I mean, we want to work with them, but there's a limit to everything, right? So it just depends.
Yeah, and I think so. My client that got the exemption, it was because he's multi-generational. It is because he runs a big operation and he's run it for many, many years.
Yeah.
He just didn't buy a farm to build a house.
Yeah, and that's what we're seeing a lot of folks, like when they start, they may be, maybe that's what they're assuming, is that, people are just coming in for the sake of building a large home, and they're going to do that secondary residence, and they're going to do that third worker residence, but they're not going to have the track record behind them to justify it. So they will not be able to do that, right? So maybe that's not a fear that's realistic.
That's right.
Yeah, no, it's all case to case.
Yeah, and I mean, floodplains. that's a topic. A lot of things have happened in the last couple of years in terms of floods.
Yeah.
Sumas Prairie.
Yeah.
I'm in the Sumas Prairie myself.
All our farms are in the
Yeah,
floodplain.
and there's a lot more than just Sumas Prairie in terms of floodplains, right? It's actually most farms are kind of, I would say, in the flood.
All of Richmond, all of Delta.
Most of Cloverdale, Pitt Meadows.
Tons of Abbotsford, Chilliwack, Mission is in the floodplains, yeah. And the reality is, it's not something that you have to fear. It is actually oftentimes quite fruitful to start your venture on a floodplain, because at the end of the day, it's land that will be farmable for many, many years in the future, right? Because it's not necessarily...
It's more fertile. The soil tends to be a little bit more fertile.
That's the thing, right? And a lot of folks, actually, real farmers, go out of their way to find these properties. They're in it for the actual farming purposes. Correct. Right? And there's a lot of folks that say, oh, we want something out of ALR. And maybe it's like XYZ acres, right? But the reality is they're kind of just looking for that speculation later down the road that maybe you'll get out of, maybe there'll be development here or whatever the case is, right? So they're not really in it for the farm's purposes. Maybe they're playing the long game, 50 years in the future or something like that. But floodplains, it's not something that necessarily has to be feared. You can do a lot within that. Yeah. I'm building mine in the Sumas Prairie after hindsight of seeing the floods, and I'm still doing it. I plan on being related to farms in some way, one way or another, for the rest of my life, right? Yeah. So it's just one of those things.
Well, that was a disaster, but they're going to fix that situation, and I think they've already started to. So,
being in the floodplain, there's nothing wrong with it. It's all our farms are in the floodplain. We're building in the floodplain, so we're fully invested. We believe in it. We understand it.
It's mainly drainage. Like for farming, you just want to make sure you have good drainage and you're okay.
And you know what? If you look at every municipality, they're doing a really good job working on their drainage plans. Mm-hmm. You go to Delta, those ditches, man, I think Delta has one of the best drainage systems even with the floods. Yeah, the fields, even when they did get wet, they did a really good, Delta does an amazing job. But every single city of Surrey, they're adding new pump stations everywhere to make sure to get that water out. So is Fort Langley. So is Abbotsford in the flood area.
Well, they're building all the dikes up too.
So you know what? It's they're taking steps every year to make sure to help out the lower flood areas, right?
It's $1 billion industry. Like this is one of those industries that carries like Canada in general, right? Yeah. So I'm saying it's something that they will invest in.
Food security too, right?
Yeah, exactly, and that's not going anywhere. So. No. Floodplains are here to stay. They're just going to improve them in terms of safety. Mm-hmm. I see Abbotsford is working hard on a solution because it's not necessarily something we can control in Canada. It's actually coming from the States, what that situation was. Yeah. but obviously they're working hard on it. Hopefully they can reference Delta and hopefully get some solutions from them. And sooner the better, right? But at the end of the day, we're plugged in and we're all in on that location. Now, outside the floodplains, there's a couple things you can do if you're outside the floodplains.
If you're out of the floodplain, you can build a 3-story, depending on the slope.
If there's a slope and if you're outside the floodplains.
Correct.
So, and that's also something you should double check parcel to parcel basis because
Correct.
every parcel is different. And the best person to check this with is actually your designer. When you're working with a designer that has some experience in the ALR and with farmland properties, right, they can actually tell you whether this parcel with the slope adheres to the rules and regulations and allows you to build that.
And the engineer as well. You kind of have to see where the slope is based on the farm home plate. Because most municipalities have the home plate where the house has to sit in the first 50 to 60 meters of the property line.
Right. There is, so in Abbotsford, I double checked on this one and they actually stated that there is no home plate yet, but talks are in play.
What about location-wise? So Surrey is restricted. They said they want you to build within the first 50 meters. I know Delta is restricted. Langley is not restricted. I think Abbotsford is starting. I think
They've been in the talks.
I don't know if they implemented it yet.
Maybe we should define it. What is a farm plate?
Well, it's the location of where you would have your personal enjoyment. So your landscaping, your home, your parking, your all of that. That does not include your barns or buildings.
That's a lot better than I would have said it, but yeah.
Yeah, but what location of house depends on again the municipality, and if you can build a 3-story, you guys nailed it. Surveyor, architect, engineer, get them involved before you remove subjects. The rule of thumb is if you're going to build a 3rd story, so if this is your main floor, your septic you'd want to have it on a lower grade just so it naturally gravitates into your septic field, right?
Yes, and your 3rd story, I don't think you can build the full size. I think it's a 50% rule.
Yeah, I think you're allowed to additional 2,000 square feet. Roughly. Yeah. So you can get away with about according to the rules, about a 7,400 square foot.
That's right. And also, it's quite hard to find a parcel like that. To find a sloped parcel outside of the floodplains, still within ALR, and to be able to use that, right? So in that situation, you're roughly in the ballpark of 7,400 square feet.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And there are pockets. Every municipality has those pockets. I know Surrey is more South Surrey for Port Kells area. Langley. A lot of farms have that option. Majority actually have that option.
Quite a few in Abbotsford. I got 3 right off the bat that I can think of right now.
Yeah. Well, there's Bradner, Huntington. Yeah.
Even Huntington actually is mostly flatlands, but there is some that have those slopes. Yeah. And that's one of those things too, is it makes sense, that rule, because that's not something that you could have used regardless for farming purposes. Yeah. Like it's within that.
But it's the same thing as going up. Like if they're letting you go down,
that's
why not go
that's
up?
why someone in the floodplain should not be restricted when they're still using the same area as a rancher. You're not going to grow vegetables on your roof.
You're still preloading the same amount of area. You're putting your foundation on the same amount of area. So yeah, that makes no sense.
Yeah. I mean, it's not that we were asking to build into the floodplain, that we're not asking to build it underneath. We're saying up. That should be fairly fair. But no, I get it. I agree with that. Yeah. Now, in other words, I mean, house sizes, restrictions in 2019, that came into play then. Right now, I still feel like I'm in a good spot. I still feel like 5,400 square foot is okay for me. Now, I got a brother as well. There's a lot of families that, East Indians aside, there's a lot of families that are farmers that have big families. And it's not something that's, unique to us. It's actually quite common that, people would want a larger home or whatever the case is. So I do think that secondary residence was a good idea. 980 square foot is a little bit low. Perhaps in the future that may change. I'm kind of banking on it.
I think it will. Again, I think it's going to be case to case, but who knows?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think that pretty much sums it up in terms of what we would expect things to be in the future, what they are right now, and kind of what they were in the past as well, right? So,
and as rules, regulations change, that's kind of the main reason for this channel, is to get the information to the public, when it comes out so they can make informed decisions.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I guess that's why we're doing it, right? There's so many topics that we have these conversations every day, but now the masses can kind of hear it from, us directly.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, guys, that concludes episode 2.
Yeah.
Looking forward to episode 3, eh?
Yeah.